internet itself is run by essentially a cartel that holds the internet hostage, basically. And if you turn off those 19 networks, the internet is dead. If you turn off any of those networks, the internet's going to have serious problems.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Accelerate. Today I have two legends, Austin Federa and Mateo Ward from 00. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having us.
I think most of my audience would be familiar with Austin as the former head of strategy and comms and a fellow shit poster, I would say, of sorts on Twitter. However, I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with his co-founder here for 00, Mateo, who's one of the most impressive people I've met just as an entrepreneur in general. So let's do some brief intros. Mateo, could you introduce yourself to the audience as how you introduced yourself to me once?
Yes, I'm not sure what I said, but I definitely want to start out with Canada because that's something that we share in common. Born and raised in Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm proud to meet fellow Canadians like yourself, but I am, like you, sort of exile or an expatriate and have decided to live all around the world. And through that process, have come in touch with some of the greatest minds and the greatest engineers in telecommunications and networking, and have worked at some of the best world-class organizations to build networks, like Global Crossing, a pioneer in subsea fiber optics, like HFT World, a lot of work for Jump Trading. I founded a company that was funded partially by Jump Trading and built very high-performance networks. Also had lots of experience with shared infrastructure, tower companies. How do these huge telecom networks share infrastructure and expand? So that's really my background. I'm a network geek. I love networks. I love maps, as you can see behind me. You'll see a lot of maps coming out of 00 because I think it just is a great way to visualize what happens in the networking world.
Thanks for that. And then Austin, Mr. Fedora, I will let you give an intro as well, and then we can go from there.
Sure. I'm Austin Federa. As you mentioned, I spent the last 4 years in first Solana Labs and then Solana Foundation. Ended up running strategy for the organization, and from the highs of 2021 to the lows of the end of 22 and the beginning of 23. Was quite an incredible place to spend 4 years. Before that, I was at Bison Trails up until their acquisition by Coinbase Cloud. And my first foray in crypto was actually back in 2017, 2018, when I joined Republic and helped them launch Republic Crypto and a bunch of that fun first ICO boom wave of things. And then got connected with Mateo and Andrew last year when they were starting to kick around the idea of 00, and three of us founded the project, and yeah, so far the rest is history.
Awesome. So I want to tease at the motivations and the problems faced leading to this moment that told you guys that it was necessary to start something so ambitious, right? Because basically you're building a new internet to tease out the future of what's coming here. Mateo, I want to start with you. You just casually mentioned that you were building and selling extremely advanced things like HFT infrastructure, fiber optic networks, et cetera. Let's maybe talk a bit more about that company. What exactly was the problem that you were solving? How did you get into this?
So starting with Global Crossing, it was just laying the subsea cables all around the world that are today the backbone of modern networks. And that's an amazing experience because you get to learn about how these cables are funded. They're massively expensive. How they're operated, they're extremely complex to operate. Everything from our meme of sharks biting the cable to all kinds of crazy things like shunt faults and other things that you have to worry about under the oceans. And then I got the chance to found a company called Neutrona Networks that was built on top of that base level infrastructure. And so we created a very sophisticated software defined networking sort of platform for high performance networking in the wide area network. And one of our customers was Jump Trading. One of our customers was Reuters. One of our customers was Bloomberg. So we were very early on exposed to extremely demanding customers that wanted to know exactly what circuit their traffic was on, exactly what the latency was on that circuit. If it went down, they did not want us to restore it because they wanted their algorithms to know that that circuit was no longer available and to move themselves onto their secondary path. So there's just a huge amount of learning about how traffic flows over this base layer infrastructure and what the very most demanding customers in the world need from it. And that's a lot of the knowledge that we're taking and building into the 00 protocol now.
And for folks that are engineers that might not be familiar with how these things actually work, when you say Jump and Bloomberg and Reuters were using you, what does that mean? How can one use the infrastructure on top of the cables?
Yeah, this is so easy for blockchain validators and other people to understand because it's the exact same application. You're just connecting a server to an interface and everything else is software, right? So basically those companies would connect their trading servers or their market newsfeed servers or whatever servers that they wanted to run. And they would connect them to these high performance cables, which basically means you're going directly between the 2 points or the multiple points that you want to go through. And they would let their software algorithms do all the rest of the work. So basically you're putting a lot of software intelligence on top of the most performant hardware. And it's as simple as that. That's exactly what our testnet does today in the Solana ecosystem.
Right. And okay, so you sold that company, and then what was next? Like what was the brief period in time before the idea of 00 came?
Yeah, well, the idea of 00 actually came back in 2016 when I was building networks for high frequency traders, because when they got into crypto, I said, I want to build that. That's the most complex use case I've ever seen for telecommunications. Crypto is, excuse my French, but it is a shit show for networking, right? It is literally a nightmare to have packets crossing in this mesh all around the world, moving traffic flows, moving every second or less all around the world. And so I wanted to build that. And I was frustrated because when we sold Neutrona, I was on the beach for 3 years. I was prohibited from working in telecommunications because we were acquired by another carrier. And so I got into cybersecurity, and which was something that happened during the pandemic. Right after we sold the company, there was a cyber pandemic, and everything that everyone knew about cybersecurity almost changed overnight. And it was a huge opportunity. We created a new startup in cybersecurity called Envito. And that knowledge as well is extremely important in building 00 because, for example, right now we're undergoing an audit, a code audit of the code that's going to be launched in mainnet beta. And it's really important to understand how to protect the network, how to protect the contributors, how to protect the users. And so I got a lot of that knowledge during that period. In parallel, I was actually a contractor working for an HFT building low latency shortwave networks. And so at the same time as I was getting the cybersecurity experience, I was also playing with the very limits of physics insofar as how fast you can shoot packets around the world through the ionosphere. And so through that contact, I got back in touch with Jump, and they said, we have some really amazing technology that we want to spin out into a project. It is the code that runs on the FPGAs today in the 00 network, and that very shortly will be open source for the whole community. But that code is a tech spinoff out of Jump Crypto, which is one of the core contributions they made. And what Austin, myself, and Andrew did is we created a crypto project, a blockchain project around that initial IP, and it's been really amazing because it's exactly what I wanted to do since 2016. And on top of that, I get to be myself while doing it, which is just one of the best things that I've experienced in crypto. Is you can just be yourself and have fun, and it's just a great place to live and work.
Yeah, it's kind of like the least sexy founding story you can have of like, oh, we got access to some incredible IP that they were fine open sourcing. But that is honestly like a huge part of it is if you think about it, like the core problem that 00 is solving is a coordination problem, right? Private fiber networks have existed for many, many, many years. Pretty much every large company you can think of uses private fiber networks, either that they run directly or that they contract someone else to run for them. And so that's like not a breakthrough concept that like you'd want to run a high performant distributed system like Google or like Solana on a private fiber network. The real thing that like has not been possible before is to have it run by multiple independent parties. And that's kind of where the magic of 00 comes in. We are not accessing fiber lines that Jump or DRW doesn't have access to somehow. What we're doing is we're enabling them to appear from the system perspective as one homogeneous network. But under the hood, it has all of the like checks and balances and that you would expect from a normal blockchain project where, if Jump's links misbehave, we have 7 other contributors to fall back on, and we can slash Jump for doing something that was against the rules of the protocol. And that's kind of where a lot of the magic comes in. And that's where like tokens are like the real unlock here. This is one of those like classic examples of something that simply would not be possible without the alignment power and the incentive structure that tokens bring to something like this.
Right. Yes. So I want to talk about the nitty gritty on some level a bit later on. I am curious. So we heard from Mateo, but Austin, you do have a relevant and very applicable background for this. You were at Bison Trails, which was the premier infrastructure company in crypto at the time, and then got acquired by Coinbase, became Coinbase Cloud, and then you joined, of course, Solana, and which is no stranger to crazy network level shenanigans. And you spent a while there, and then what happened in your mind such that you were like, I must now move on to this extremely difficult and ambitious problem?
Yeah, I would say there's probably 3 or 4 things that sort of all came to like the crux at the same moment. One of them was this was an idea that had been sort of sticking in my head since like 2022, talking with Kevin Bowers and some of the FireDancer engineers about how this analogy of a Ferrari stuck in traffic in Chicago just sort of like kept sticking in my head and Kevin Bowers would talk about this all the time. He was like, look, like there's a reason that like the folks at Jump don't own Ferraris, and it's because of the Chicago traffic, right? And so like there's this whole idea of you can optimize a validator client to an insane amount, but if you stick it in a situation where it can't actually perform optimally, it's not that you've wasted the engineering, but you're not getting the full potential out of the thing. And so that idea of, man, we've got to find some way to make sure that when Anza gets like Agave really high up to speed, when FireDancer gets their FireDancer client fully shipped, that we're not kind of looking at this thing and going like, oh, there's a great tech demo where we can do 1 million transactions per second. But in reality, we're stuck at 10 or 15 or 20,000 transactions per second because of the limitations of the public internet. And this is where if you go back, like around this time, Solana was starting to dabble with the idea of like state committees and basically like effectively dropping the number of nodes from, thousands down to maybe 200, and that 200 would rotate. But it was all these basically tricks to say, we can't really fundamentally solve the problem that the internet's not fast enough. And so we're going to get around it in all these other ways. And you see a bunch of L2s have done this where they all had decentralization somewhere on their roadmap and multiple sequencers, and they all kind of give it up on that because it's very hard to do. And I'd say from an ideological perspective, I really did not want Solana to take that similar path. And at the same time, I wanted to make it possible for other folks who are coming up with new network architectures and designs to have that same level of resourcing available to them to be able to say, like, look, the best idea should win in the market. Solana's got the best ideas right now, but like it should borrow from other great ideas that come up. And we should have a competition market, a competitive marketplace. More fast chains make all the fast chains better. And that was one of the main things for me, was like, if I was going to leave the Solana Foundation, which is like an incredible place to work, and just it was such a privilege to spend 4 years like working on the project, it had to be something that could advance all of crypto and wasn't either competing with Solana or something that was a protocol built on top of just Solana. And so, the kind of the stars aligned to make this thing possible. I think, crypto's full of people who are like very embedded in blockchain and very smart about blockchain, but then kind of just think they can go do everything else. And I very much did not want to make that mistake, because like, I don't know much about high performance networking. Like at a surface level, I know a lot about it, but like I haven't worked in the industry. I haven't done it. It's a very relationship based industry. And so teaming up with Mateo and Andrew here was really the thing that kind of made this whole thing possible. And it just sort of became too good of a moment where everything came together to turn that idea down.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. So on one level, we are democratizing Ferraris. So that seems great. No, I do want to talk about how the internet works and then use that as a segue into how 00 works. But I do want to ask one question that piqued my interest there, which is you mentioned how certain, let's say, approaches in crypto have, let's say, somewhat sacrificed decentralization because of the problem space being quite difficult. What do you guys think about, like, is decentralization at all levels of the stack actually that important? Is there a more pragmatic trade-off to make there, or like, how do you approach this?
So I would kind of draw the analogy here to the banking sector, which is, if you're based in the United States and you go back to 2019, the view of Bitcoin as like a sovereign asset didn't really make a lot of sense. We were sitting around, 1% inflation, interest rates were functionally zero. Like we had a very like stable government system that was still functioning better than pretty much anywhere else in the world. We look 5 years forward, 6 years forward, and we're in a very different place nowadays. And the people who got crypto in a very fundamental way in the early days were the people who lived in either weak democracies or weak authoritarian governments. That kind of Goldilocks zone in the middle of like a mostly authoritarian system, but still a decent amount of freedom. Those folks were like Bitcoin maxis, Ethereum maxis, USDC and USDT maxis, because they understood that like you'd go to the bank and someone would say, well, maybe we'll let you take $100,000 out, but you got to come back 7 days later and we have to run it up the chain and get the Minister of Finance to sign off on it. And it's really easy sitting in the United States or sitting in like, another first world country to say that like, we don't really need to decentralize all of the stack. We can trust a bunch of actors in different parts. And I think to some extent that's true depending on what part. Like, I don't think anyone's seriously saying we need to get rid of AMD and Intel as the CPU vendors that blockchain systems run on. But we really see that when push comes to shove, decentralization doesn't matter until it really matters, and then there's kind of no alternative to it. And that's the piece that I think we keep coming back to here, is the easy way to build 00 would have just been as an equity company where we go out and acquire a bunch of fiber links, we charge everyone to operate on them. We run it basically like Bison Trails, right? A centralized for-profit equity company that just produces a really awesome service. And I think the difference there is that becomes one entity to sue, one choke point, one thing that you can go after if you're a government and you decide suddenly you don't like crypto anymore, which, we're living under a Trump administration at the moment, which is quite friendly to crypto. But we have to remember, not a lot of laws have changed. And, maybe AOC in 2028 is a very different crypto policy. It's very hard to predict what the future is going to be.
Yeah, definitely agree on the soft authoritarian-ish government being a big motivating force for crypto, hence why me and Mateo, who are Canadians, got into crypto. No, I'm joking, although not really. Okay, I have been teasing at really getting to the meat of the protocol, the company, the future, everything. Right before I do that, Mateo, you have a very unique understanding of how these systems work. And so I want to actually ask you just a question very broadly. You can take it however you want. How does the internet work today?
Yeah, it's to make it more specific, I'm going to explain how it works with relation to how it's currently used by validators and by blockchain. But as you and I were going back and forth when we first met, it's very centralized. You may have seen a recent article about how centralized DNS is. There's just a few key holders. It's controlled by the US domain name
Can you
server.
also, talk about what DNS is for people who are not?
Yeah, well, DNS is the technology that translates a web domain name into an IP address. And so when you post a website, if you don't have a DNS service, the traffic won't go to your website. And so that is controlled by a very small number of key holders and is controlled by a US entity. And the whole world agreed to do that. That's fine, but it is very centralized. And then the internet itself is, as your now I would say famous tweet exposed, is run by about 19 tier 1 ISPs, internet service providers. And the way they did that is by creating what is essentially a cartel and agreeing that they would not peer with anyone except themselves. And when I say peer, I mean you connect the two networks together and you exchange all traffic with no charging, no metering, just freely flows between the two networks. So there's about 19, if you add a few smaller ones, 21 large tier 1 ISPs that created this internet cartel where they peer with each other for free. And what they agreed to do is charge the rest of the world high fees for accessing that combined internet. And so there you have tier 2 ISPs that have to pay transit to the tier 1s, except in their own regions where they're allowed to peer. And you have tier 3 ISPs that have to pay everyone. And then you have the rest of the world that has to pay these tier 1s. And so basically it's like a layered cartel that that holds the internet hostage, basically. And if you turn off those 19 networks, the internet is dead. If you turn off any of those networks, the internet's going to have serious problems. And so, while it seems like this ubiquitous, free for all type of system, it is a very lucrative for-profit system. It's about a $1 trillion a year business. And I think I mentioned this on another podcast when Elon Musk launched Starlink. His objective was to just get 2 to 3% of that $1 trillion, which of course is a lot of money. And he's still not there yet. And even, it's been very successful. So it's a massive, extractive, semi-centralized business. And what we want to do is to disrupt that and make that the equivalent of that business be owned by the blockchain community and from a grander perspective by all distributed systems that have a use case to run on it.
Wow, that is quite a large industry, obviously. That seems very naturally, very ambitious, very difficult. Obviously, these entrenched agents, let's say, have quite the incentive to not let that go. And so the technology, I'm assuming, will not be enough here, and you will need all sorts of different let's say strategy for non-technical aspects of this. So maybe let's start from the first principles here. How does 00 help solve this problem?
Yeah, a number of ways, but the first way and the most important way is by taking a high performance wide area networking approach. And that means that the traffic cannot route the way it routes over the internet. And if you give me 30 seconds, I'll try to explain why that's super important. Mm-hmm. If we recently did a packet capture because an IP trace route, because we wanted to analyze how traffic is currently transiting the US, for example. And one of the ones, and we want to make it visual and post it on our website and blog and stuff so people can really understand this. One of the packets that we traced went from New York. It was going from New York to Seattle. It went from New York to San Jose, to Washington, D.C., to Chicago, to Denver, to Seattle. That is completely ludicrous. It makes no sense. And you might say, how can that happen? That's ridiculous. Well, it actually went on 3 different networks, and these networks route traffic via Border Gateway Protocol, BGP, and they do it via what's called BGP attributes. And those BGP attributes can be any number of factors that aren't related to best performance. They could be related to adjacencies where you want the traffic, you're forcing the traffic to depart at a certain point in your network. They could be hot potato where you want to get the traffic off of your network as quickly as possible and onto someone else's network. They could be political. There could be countries that they block from their system and route around, even if it's super inefficient. But at the end of the day, the big problem is that the packets don't have the network doesn't have end-to-end visibility about where the packet's going from and to. And that's really the big innovation that we're creating at 00, and the big disruption. It is having a software-defined network with a software controller that is abstracted from the network and can see all of the links and the state of all of the links and can route traffic in the most efficient way. That has only been possible on centralized networks up till now. And so really the big unlock, the big value unlock that 00 is bringing, and the hard part of the engineering, is to figure out how to have a single AS number. I don't know if you can see my shirt. So our mainnet autonomous system number is 209321. A single AS number overlaid on top of all these networks, routing traffic efficiently using the BGP protocol, and only routing for lowest latency. That's the key, is making sure that we're always on the lowest latency path. And so we've come up with a system, a software system, that is able to run a single controller on a single AS number over top of all of these individual network contributions. And that's really where the high performance aspect of it comes in the first part of the way that this is different from the internet.
I see. So if I'm to just very crudely summarize, you would like a faster internet, right? In some sense, and you obviously I'm butchering that a little bit just for the sake of the audience here, but so that part makes sense to me. Now, how do we get from there to the centralization problem that we just talked about?
Let's go to the other side right now. If we go to the other end of the world, it's private, centralized, high-performance networks like the ones big banks and HFTs use. And I was watching the previous Accelerate episodes. Congrats, they were all great. And the one with Packy McCormick, you guys were talking about, like, does your system enable better, faster, cheaper, right? That was like his kind of philosophy about if a system is worthwhile. And so if you take the HFT networks, the high performance networks, are they better and faster than the internet? Absolutely. They're way faster and way better than the internet, but they're not cheaper. They're way more expensive, right? The step up CapEx investment to create a global low latency fiber network is huge. And so the challenge we have on the centralization side is, how do you take a centralized business model requiring tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of CapEx investment and decentralize it, democratize it, and make it accessible to everyone? That's really our challenge. And that's what each of the components of the 00 protocol attacks. So, the tokenization is a key part of that. Decentralizing the network controller, the agent that runs in the switch that deploys the configurations that the controller is pushing to the switches, all of that stuff needs to be decentralized. And we have a very good idea of how to do that. And it's built into the decisions that we're making today in our mainnet beta deployment. So my shirt says mainnet, but what we're deploying in the near future is called mainnet beta, because we are going to be partially decentralized. And then over time, we're going to continue pushing that decentralization into the network.
Got it. Makes sense. Austin, did you have anything to do with that naming? Mainnet beta from Solana?
Yeah, I mean, we were sort of thinking, like, how do we express to people that the network is high performant and ready, but it is not in its finished state in terms of feature set, and it's also not in its finished state in terms of multi-party control and decentralization. And so, mainnet beta felt like a nice nod back and reference to Solana.
So the end vision here, I think, has become more clear, as Mateo just described. Obviously, to get there, there's a path that you guys have deemed optimal, the go-to-market, and what set of decisions you make today to get closer there. And it seems like the most obvious thing here is you start with blockchains, and specifically, you're not constrained to Solana, but it seems like that probably has, just given the network activity, it's probably one of the best places to start. So let's talk about, I want to ask two questions. One is is that right? Did I describe that correct? Is that your go-to-market? What does that look like over a longer time horizon? And then two would be, let's say I'm on, and this has sub-questions. If I'm a Solana user, what changes for me, right? And if I'm a validator, a node operator on Solana that actually has to interact with the network level stuff, what changes for me?
Yeah, so let's kind of start, why do we pick Solana as the place to start? And there's a few reasons for it. One, we know it quite well. We share a lot of technical overlap and expertise with the FireDancer team and the Jump team. But Solana is the hardest nut to crack when it comes to high performance networking. It is, if you think about a ratio of the transactions per second to node count of a network, there's nothing even remotely close to Solana out there. It does thousands of transactions per second, and it has 1,400 validators, something like that at this moment. So it's a lot of data that has to get moved around. It's a giant turbine tree of state propagation. There's transactions flying all over the place from all sorts of different sources, a whole solid chunk from Helios. And that is sort of a perfect example of where I think 00 can shine. It's kind of an old Tollyism of do the hardest thing first, because then everything else is easy. And so supporting Solana is definitely doing the hardest thing first. And so that's kind of one of the reasons we started here. The other thing is that Solana, and I know this term's a little out of favor with some folks, but it has Rev, which is meaningful, right? It has sources of validator income and validator revenue that are not solely just inflationary. And that was not the case in 2022 for the most part. But what that means is that there's a dynamic here of validators being, we hope, willing to pay for higher performance connections, because it means that they can access types of MEV that wouldn't be profitable otherwise, and so they'll see enhanced MEV rewards. It means that the devs at Anza and FireDancer can start pushing the protocol limits higher more quickly, because they know that the fundamental network has more capacity. And so maybe it means we go from 60 million CUs to 200 million CUs over the next 12 months, as opposed to going to 150 million CUs. Or we start to shorten block times down from 400 milliseconds to 350 milliseconds, because suddenly we've taken this geographic penalty and we've kind of reduced it dramatically, because we're running on dedicated fiber that's much faster. I mean, our testnet alone cuts off something like 60 milliseconds from Singapore to New York. And the testnet's kind of some of the worst links we have in place for this network. And so we hope to sort of show validators quite meaningful improvements. So from a validator perspective, our ultimate goal is making them more money. 00 is not going to be successful if validators are not making more money. And that more money can come from a variety of sources. It is increased block rewards, because we can fit more transactions in a block. It is increased MEV, because suddenly there are trades that traders will make now with 00 that they would not make with the public internet. And it's kind of a hard concept to get around. But if you have a good predictive model and you think with 70% confidence where the market's going to be in 300 milliseconds, but not 320 milliseconds, you may not send a trade. Because on the public internet, you say, okay, well, the leader is now over here. It's going to take me somewhere between 280 and 350 milliseconds to get there. But there's a good chance my trade would now land after my expertise about where the market is headed. And so I might be on the wrong side of a trade. And so in TradFi, that trade would be made because it will always take you 347.2 milliseconds to get from point A to point B. You don't know that in crypto, right? Even with all the work that, Helios and Triton and everyone has done to make transaction delivery much stronger, you're still at the whim of running from the Helios system to wherever the leader happens to be. And you don't know, like in between like a super high performance Helios endpoint and the leader might be a cable cut, right? It might be a routing change that's happened because there's just a cable down for maintenance. And this actually happened where for a few months ago, validators in Tokyo suddenly started performing quite poorly, and no one sort of could figure out why for a little while. It turns out it was scheduled maintenance on a cable that, like, on some level, everyone should have known about, but on another level, no one ever thinks about because we don't like think that low level for the most part when we're thinking about blockchain systems.
That example that Austin just gave is a critical example of internet routing that I think your audience would super appreciate to visualize this. Because when that cable that Austin referenced went down for maintenance, the internet routed around the long way because the internet has no incentive to restore that traffic on the fastest path, the fastest alternate path. They dump it off on some other country, on some other route, because the way their BGP attributes work. What the way a high performance network does is it immediately reroutes that traffic on the second fastest cable, which in almost all cases is the exact same subsea path as the first one was on. It's just lying right beside it in the ocean. So I just wanted to jump in there and make that point, because as we go through this, you're going to see over and over again how the internet routing is inefficient in the case of congestion, in case of maintenance, in the cases of cable cuts, and all that stuff happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Tokyo example is a particularly vivid one for me because as an RPC provider, when that happens, our systems are affected and the customers ask us, hey, what's happening? Are you down? And we're like, well, actually, the cable was cut maybe by a shark or something. And they're like, okay, Mert, I'm sure that happened. You just take the blame. And
yeah, the shark ate my cable as opposed to the dog ate my homework.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I do want to talk about the business model, the sustainability of this, but I do have that same, let's say, question about the future, the very long-term vision of this, which is the idea that we stay with the niche cases of, let's say, electronic trading and blockchains, or is there a chance where this makes it out onto, for example, when I'm messaging people on WhatsApp, it uses some of these routes? Like, is there a chance that it makes the entire internet faster at some level?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like there's two ways to sort of view this and think about this. The first is the trading space and the crypto space is actually a massive market from a monetary perspective. And so they're sort of like trading is always sort of the customer of first adoption of new technology. They're willing to pay the most for it because they have the most to gain from it. And then it kind of trickles down to other use cases. So we've actually already teamed up with this group Shelby, which is working with Jump to build a new decentralized storage network. And they're using 00 as the backhaul technology to basically sync all of the storage nodes and run data checksums on them and basically make sure all the data is actually there and get it there as quickly as possible. And then they use the public internet for sort of your typical CDN delivery type stuff. It's funny you mentioned WhatsApp because WhatsApp is, of course, owned by Meta. And Meta is one of the largest investors of subsea fiber anywhere in the world. And they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it to sell ads because you really need your Instagram reels to load super quickly so the brain rot continues, so you keep scrolling, so you see more ads. And so like this is actually a perfect example of like Facebook started out as a dorm room software company. It then got into hardware and it built its own data center. Well, first it built its own server racks and then it built its own data centers. And now it's building its own subsea cables. And we kind of see crypto as very much on the same journey where it started off with like Raspberry Pis and shoeboxes in people's closets. We now have professionalized bare metal operation providers that I wouldn't quite say specialize in crypto, but definitely like have tweaked services and offerings for the crypto market. And now we kind of need to do the next jump and start addressing fiber.
Yeah, I think Toli said on your first inaugural episode don't build a general purpose network, right? That was one of his pieces of advice. And then you guys debated whether Solana was general purpose or purpose built. But for our case, it's not only a purpose built network, it's a multi-tenant purpose built network. The way to think about this is, you build an ice cream shop, and that's a purpose built business for people who like ice cream. But inside that ice cream shop, you need to have a bunch of flavors of ice cream. The team always laughs when I talk about blockchains as flavors of ice cream or anything like that. But it's true. Like within the population of people that like ice cream, there are a bunch of people that like hate chocolate or love vanilla or whatever, right? And so all of these multi-tenant options that we're providing and building into the 00 protocol are so that any purpose-built like distributed system whose use case works on 00 is going to have a flavor of ice cream that is good for them, that they like. And so that's anywhere from blockchains to CDNs to AI models to any type of content distribution or a bunch of future use cases that we don't know about today. And that's another cue we sort of take from Solana is build non-prescriptive infrastructure. You build a high performance infrastructure. You don't know the exact use cases that are going to run on it, but you certainly know that today's most demanding use cases use that same type of infrastructure. So it's a good bet that there's going to be some amazing stuff built on it in the future.
Yeah, this is like the classic thing of so I was part of the team that like built Metaplex in the early days, and one of the things that is so interesting about Metaplex is it was entirely wrong in 90% of its thesis, right? It was this whole idea. Metaplex is like the protocol that mints and manages a bunch of NFTs on Solana. The original thesis was everyone wanted auctions because auctions, you could run them on Solana. You couldn't afford to run them on Ethereum. Every artist wanted its own storefront. Every storefront should be self-hosted and should be like stored on IPFS or Arweave or something. And the entire thesis was wrong, except people really wanted NFTs. And so by building the thing at the lowest level possible and building it in kind of this flexible framework, token metadata, the program, took off. Well, the rest of the stack that Metaplex initially went to market with didn't work at all, right? It just didn't work, but didn't catch on in the market. And that's kind of like a real like success story of building at the lowest level possible and making the least number of assumptions about how your product is going to be used. And I think that's one of the things that like we very much took from the Solana strategy of like, who knew that like, compressed NFTs would lead to state compression and, fast tokens and fast DeFi would lead to meme coins and all these types of different things. But when you build stuff with like not a lot of prescription, but a lot of low-level primitives, people will build things on top of it that you never thought were possible before. And that's one of the coolest things about 00. We get hit up all the time by people being like, could we use it in this way? And we're like, we never thought of that, but absolutely, you totally could.
Cool. Well, it somewhat reminds me of the saying that I will butcher something about those serious about software will build their own hardware, except in this case, it's more like those serious about software will literally go under the sea and look at the cables, which is obviously the eventual, let's say, deduction of that train of thinking. Okay, so imagine I am now, my name is Jeff. I have a Patagonia vest with a plaid shirt underneath, and I am asking you about economics, okay? I'm in private equity. How does the economics of this business, right? So there's a business, there's a labs component to it, I'm assuming. There is the network, and then there is the stakeholders of the network, which in this case would be something like perhaps bare metal providers, validators. Walk me through this economy and how do the funds flow? What are the rates? Like, how should people think about this?
So I think one of the pieces to start out with is like, this is a high carrying cost network. So the network contributors have real significant costs and have to put in real significant effort into building and maintaining this global fiber network. And so as a result of that, we kind of developed a new reward model that kind of is an old reward model at the same time. So we have this thing called proof of utility, and proof of utility is trying to sort of get the best of proof of stake and the best of proof of work combined into one system. So the problem with proof of stake systems is you can have a lot of tokens and do very little work and accrue a lot of value. So, maybe Helios is a bad example, but like someone who has a high staked validator doesn't spend 1,000 times the cost to run their validator as someone who has a low stake validator, but they may earn 1,000 times the rewards because the proof of stake's unit of security and unit of value is tokens. And that's very appropriate for a network that's trying to secure assets issued on top of it. 00 does not have assets issued on top of it, right? It is not a smart contract blockchain. It is an infrastructure system for other people to run blockchains on top of. And so our reward model is directly proportional to contributions. And so we use something called Shapley values, and there's blogs we have on the website where you can read in detail about this at 00.xyz. But at its core, if a contributor to the network is bringing in a network graph that is 30% of the value of the network in terms of its usefulness, they should receive 30% of the rewards. And so when you think about the economic system, it's much closer to Bitcoin, where if you have 10% of the hash power, you will get 10% of the rewards averaged out over a certain period of time. And we think that's a really, really good model to incentivize competition between different contributors to the 00 network. And that ultimately benefits validators and users of the 00 network as well. So then we get down to, like, let's say you're a Solana validator or you're a Solana RPC and you want to operate on 00. So we think the model that makes the most sense is a percent-based fee assessed onto the validators. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that as a validator increases in stake, its traffic increases in pretty much a linear manner to that. So if your validator is 1% of stake, you use a lot more bandwidth than if it has 0.1% of stake. And so the reason we think that this model works really well is it scales in a very predictable way. You don't have to deal with like data rate costs and things like that, because the fundamental problem is when you meter something, you discourage someone from increasing the capacity of it or using more of it. And bandwidth is not like block space. There's functionally unlimited bandwidth available to the 00 network. It's just a function of how many contributors want to bring additional cables and capacity into the system. And so we don't want to create any barriers that would prevent us from going from 3 terabits per second of capacity to 300 terabit per second of capacity, simply because people would have to pay more to use more data. It also creates incentives where you may not actually want Solana to be faster, because then your data charges go up, for example. And so we think that a percent model is probably the best way to do that. We're designing the system in such a way that you're not going to pay a fee to 00 unless we're making you more money. So, for example, Jito thinks they can make blocks significantly more profitable due to MEV using 00 because of some of the things we talked about beforehand. And so, we're not going to charge someone a 5% fee on block rewards unless we're making them at least 5% more block rewards. And these networks are expensive too, right? The reason we have these top tier contributors right now, I think this is true. The vast majority of our contributors are already people who are operating in the blockchain space. And so they have like a myriad of business use cases where they would like 00 to exist. Either there's someone like Galaxy who owns a bunch of SOL, and I think this will be good for their asset holdings, I think is the neutral way I can phrase that. And then we also have folks who are professional market makers and who are providing capacity because they think they'll be able to quote tighter if they have faster connectivity, and they'll actually be able to get picked off less, and they'll be able to basically increase the efficiency of businesses that they already run. And so our goal here is really to like get Solana to 1 million transactions per second as fast as possible. But to do that, we do need some cost sharing. I think in a perfect world, I go off script here for a minute, but I think the race to 0% commission was actually harmful to the larger ecosystem, because we've kind of got a bifurcation of validators now among people who their primary business is not running a validator, but the validator is in some ways necessary for their other business to function. I think Helios probably falls into that category as well to some capacity, where because of the way Solana has stake-weighted QoS, Helios's RPCs can be a higher quality of RPC if it has more stake it can proxy through, or simply if you control a validator, and so you can sort of work that into your system's flow. We've seen this from a number of folks who run like RPCs, where access to stake is at least an important component for some work that they do. Or you have folks who basically are like the Drift validator, where Drift is the core product, the validator just helps them do that in a better way. And those businesses can very easily provide 0% commission and 100% pass through and all these other types of things. And it's harder for smaller validators who don't have that to do it. And so I think the idea, like, we would love to charge stakers as opposed to charging validators, but the feedback we got from that was that there's so much competition on APY rates, especially on the smaller validators, that was going to be a hard thing for folks to swallow initially. And so that's kind of why we've been starting off with block rewards and MEV related fees. But again, like I've said this before, I'll say this again, we're going to live and die by being able to make validators more profitable. And if there isn't like a plus EV reason for a validator to join 00, other than just advancing Solana and the good of the network and those sorts of things, we're not going to be successful anyway. So that is our ultimate North Star.
Yeah, it's if you want to think about what the equivalent of that would be in the traditional world, it is a group of a few hundred validators getting together and forming a club, and then going to AT&T, British Telecom, or Singtel and saying, "Hey, I'd like to buy a 100 gig circuit across the Atlantic Ocean, but I'd like it to be sort of fractional. I'd like you to invoice all of us separately. I'd like the bandwidth to be available on demand. I'd like it to run multicast. I'd like it to dedupe and sig verify as well. And by the way, no credit check, because we're not really credit worthy. So please don't check our credit. And please deliver it right away, because I can't wait the normal 90 days delivery cycle. I just want it right now." That's basically the parallel of the economic model. The way it works is completely frictionless. It allows people to immediately access the bandwidth, and everyone shares this huge cost through a sharing model that makes it a very low marginal cost with no capex step up. So I think it's truly disruptive from a financial structure and a commercial model.
Got it. Okay, cool. And for more information on the specifics of that, people can go to 00.xyz or Z, may I say?
Yeah, thank you.
Canadian. Okay, so as we come to, let's say, the last 8 minutes or so of this episode, I do want to talk about startups in general as a meta concept, right? And so I have a few questions here, but Mateo, I'll start with you first. You are a repeat entrepreneur founder. What are some of the lessons you learned from your earlier ventures that you're applying to 00?
Yeah, so this is my fourth startup, fourth time eating glass and staring into the abyss. And it's no more comfortable this time than the last three. It's difficult. And I think what I learned is that I just need to manage stress. I need to let some things happen. And what I'm having the most fun with right now is just be myself, because when you're a first-time entrepreneur, it is really hard. You feel like you're playing a role. You have to convince VCs, and you have to be that sort of very strong, polished founder. But in the fourth time around, I'm having fun just doing my thing. And I think one of the philosophies that I've always had is world-class quality. And so for any founder starting a company, if you don't build it world-class, it's not going to last. And I think if you build it from the very start to be world-class quality, it doesn't have to be perfect on day one. Austin always tells us, if you're proud of it, you ship too slow, right? So you don't have to make it perfect, but you do have to build it for quality and build it to last. And so part of that is recruiting people, right? How do you get world-class resources onto the team? And that's the other big learning that I had, is like, don't try to get a bunch of people that are substandard and you think you can coach them into being world-class. No, bring world-class people onto your team. And a lot of times that means you have to bring partners on, because it's very hard to get world-class people as a junior employee with a salary. And that's the great thing about crypto, is we can all be partners in this, right? So we went out and we recruited some of the best engineers in the world from some of the most world-class companies like AWS, like all kinds of different HFT firms, like aerospace companies, and we made them all partners, right? I mean, that's the great thing about this, is you guys all come on, we're all sharing in the upside, and let's build something that's world-class and built to last. So I think that, just quality and people are like my biggest two learnings. Is, you got to get the best on the bus and get them in the right seats, and you're off and running.
Great advice. Austin, moving on to you. Okay, I'm going to also butcher this. I think this is your first venture, right? Okay. So
First as a founder, yep.
Right. So as a founder, a first-time founder, you obviously have worked with a ton, but now you're in the driver's seat. What are some things you've learned along the way so far that might be helpful for other folks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you asked me 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, I don't think I would have told you I wanted to be a founder. I would say to people who are thinking about doing it, it is easier than you think and harder than you think. But the idea really has to be one that captures you. I think for a long time, I would sort of look at people who left either Solana to be founders, or earlier in my career, friends I had who went to be founders. And I would sort of be like surprised in their conviction. And what I've seen is the people who take ideas that they don't have conviction of, but they found something because they want to be a founder, either aesthetically or lifestyle wise or socially. They kind of want to be in that class. It tends to fail and go very poorly. And that was the thing I'd seen that held me back for so long. But the thing I'll say is, like, if you are thinking of becoming a founder and this isn't an idea that like keeps you up at night and you keep coming back to and thinking about, don't do it, because it's hard. It's risky. It statistically, it doesn't go well most of the time. And, that's kind of was a big thing for me, was like kind of realizing that like I have the skills to do this, but also this is something that I would rather be working on than other opportunities that I have. And that's kind of a really big component, I would say. Like, if you feel like I have no other choice but to be a founder, it's a terrible reason to be a founder. If you feel like I have a bunch of great opportunities before me and the one that really captures me is going off and doing this thing and taking the risk, you should totally do that. I think the other thing I'd say is I had like the best masterclass you could possibly have in getting ready to launch a project like this, which is like working for Raj and Toli for 4 years, and seeing all the stuff that Solana did correctly, all the things that maybe it could have done better. Seeing kind of, going from being completely unknown project in 2021 to, the first breakpoint, to the second breakpoint where FTX collapsed literally at the end of the conference, navigating that thing, and also seeing all these other projects not be able to navigate that. Like Terra just completely went away, right? And that for me was kind of a really powerful sense of like, oh, you can actually, there is a formula and a playbook here, and you have to modify it all the time. And that's where like a base of experience is really important. I would actually discourage 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds from founding companies. I think you should go work at a growth stage startup that is like kicking ass. And you should take a tiny salary if they offer you a tiny salary. Like, spend those years of your career learning how to run a company, and then go off and do your own thing. That's kind of the biggest advice I have to people. There are those rare founders that are 20 or 21 are really ready to do it, but they're few and far between. And I think, quite frankly, like we're not all Mark Zuckerberg.
We are not all Zuckerberg. That is correct. Okay, I do have very quick few more questions. Mateo, you seem like I mean, now that you said, you're more comfortable being yourself and whatnot, you've obviously seen a lot of companies. You've started, this is the fourth one. What annoys you the most about, like other founders? Like what mistakes do they make that annoy you? Maybe you've seen this in yourself before as well.
Two things. One is big outsized egos. Really pisses me off because they're just doing themselves a disservice. But more than that, they're torturing their employees. They're torturing their team members. If it's a crypto project, they're torturing their partners. And the second thing is allowing toxicity in organizations, which is just awful. If you put up with toxic people in your organization that spread venom and put people in a bad mood and stress people out, it's just awful, and it's bad for humanity. So I would try to take a hard look at yourself as a founder and say, am I wearing my ego on my sleeve? Do I think I'm the big kahuna, or am I being myself, being authentic, connecting with people, looking at them in the eyes? Am I really being the example that I need to be? Because that's really what you need to lead by, is by example.
Very well said.
Yeah, I mean, I think crypto has gone through. I don't think crypto needs to grow up in like a macro sense, but I do think there's a lot of people in crypto who are fundamentally unemployable anywhere else. And that was because crypto was like a home for people like that, but like the industry has changed, right? Like I think we're moving to a place where the talent pool, like you're expected to be an exceptional engineer, an exceptional operator, but also like able to operate in a meeting without swearing at people and things like that, which is like not an unreasonable ask for the comp levels and the opportunity that's in this space. But I think it's been a hard adjustment for some folks. I mean, I totally I see exactly what Mateo has like said, that how like my version of this is I think firing is more important than hiring. And that like you build company culture as much by who you fire as who you hire, and getting a exceptional performer who is like toxic and ruining the rest of your organization out, I think is more important than the contributions that individual can make. And that is like the biggest change, is we have this incredible talent pool in crypto now, and it's changing how companies operate and the type of people that they have to bring in.
Austin, what you obviously served as communications head of communications. What advice would you have for people who might be listening for how they should do company communications?
Yeah, I mean, so much of comms is about long-term positioning and long-term value. And the biggest advice I give people is like, a brand takes years to build and minutes to destroy. And so when you're putting stuff out there, like there's a reason that I'm not going to like name names, but there are those blockchains where kind of no one trusts anything that they tweet or any press release that they send out, and they've earned that reputation over time. And then there's also networks out there where they put something out and the default assumption is that's interesting, that's serious, that's real. And so when you're thinking about comms, like don't think about it as transactional. If you're trying to trick the market or trying to do like a cute press release that you think is gonna, slip by, like people's bullshit detector is really good on crypto Twitter. And I don't think you can, like, so much of Web 2 comms and marketing is kind of just gaslighting people. And you can't get away with that. You can get away with that in Web 3 during a bull market, but like there's probably only like a 9-month period you can really get away with that type of stuff. And so that's the biggest thing, is be honest about what you're doing. Simplify your message, but don't simplify the details. I think that's one of the things that Anatoly does exceptionally well, is he will ignore maybe the technical specifics of how something works, but he'll give you the spirit of how it works, which is very different than even how a Google or an Apple communicates these days. Apple, like they used to be unabashedly technical. Like Steve Jobs used to give like technical keynotes that were like systems level technical. And now Apple's all just like, it's amazing, it's magic, it works. And that I think that stuff is really hard and toxic to people in Web3, because we're in this industry because it is different. Now that may not apply at all if you're a retail protocol trying to attract pumped up fund traders or something like that. But if you're building a company like Helios, if you're building something like 00, if you're building something like Helium, your other venture, it's really important to have that comms that's honest with people, but also excited and hopeful for the future. The last thing I would say is negative marketing almost never works. And it's usually short term. You don't see like a Delta plane crash in American Airlines being like, look, we're safer, right? It like the minute you do that kind of like competitor versus competitor, especially on security or safety, you undermine people's trust in the space entirely. You don't actually elevate your brand. You just continue to drag down the industry. And I think the collapse of FTX, the collapse of Terra really saw that. No one was like, oh man, Terra collapsed. Let me put all of my money into some other algorithmic stablecoin. It basically killed the whole concept for years, and even hurt the USDC and USDT issuance market dramatically as well. So that's kind of the other thing to remember is like this space is still very much growing quickly, and for the most part, there's no need to go PvP on stuff.
Fantastic. That'll make some great clips. Thank you. Ending on a lighter note for Mateo here, I have two questions. Okay. One is, well, I mean, if you're listening to this on Spotify, then you obviously won't appreciate Mateo's looks here. But Mateo, first question is going to be, how do you pull off being follically challenged like myself? What are some tips you might have? And then number two, you at the beginning of the podcast, you briefly mentioned you've basically been everywhere, right? You've traveled all sorts of places. Where would you say is the most underrated place that people don't check out enough?
Yeah, absolutely. So the follically challenged story actually begins in the basement of a bar in New York City, and I really can't talk about it. I'm sworn to secrecy. But what I can say is that you yourself were mercilessly criticized and roasted with no chance to defend yourself based on your follicle challengedness. And you took it so well that my respect for you increased exponentially. And I decided before this podcast, I would take the hair clipper on setting number 1 to my head and shave the whole thing off in honor of how great you were during that roast. So I am just taking it all off. Again, being authentic, being myself. My family's not too happy about it. They thought I looked better without the shaved head. But that's okay. They'll get used to it. So you're an inspiration to me, Mert, on that front. And I'd like another opportunity to talk to you about Canada healthcare, self-responsibility for healthcare, and all those other fun things I've seen you talk about on other podcasts as well.
So you've traveled to lots of places. Where is the most underrated place that most people should check out?
It's where I live. It's where I'm calling from right now, Buenos Aires, Argentina. An amazing, amazing place. I think it's getting less underrated by the day. People are discovering it. But I've traveled literally all around the world, and this is one of the most surprising places that I've been. And to live here is really an honor. Austin came down to visit me in the very early days, and I took him to a submarine cable station, as well as to a major data center where he saw the cables coming in from Google and Facebook and and Netflix and all into the Meet Me room. And I think he was, let him speak for himself, but I think he was really surprised at the level of sophistication, the level of infrastructure, the culture, everything here is just really fascinating and really vibrant. And so I would recommend anyone who gets a chance, come down and visit. We'll get together, and it's just a wonderful place.
Mateo is underselling his asado skills, which is pretty much an entire day backyard grilling experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely invited, Mert. Hope to see you soon.
Of course, yes. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Mateo, Austin, this was great. Thanks for your time. Where can people learn more?
So you can check out the project at 00.xyz. You can get links to join the network as a validator or as a contributor. And actually, if you own fiber, have access to fiber, we'd love to talk. docs.melbecklabs.com has all the technical details about the project. And on 00.xyz, we may or may not have rebuilt the website before this goes out. We'll see. But there's a journal section that has all of our blogs and write-ups, and there's a ton of awesome economic writing that Nihar has done, diving into theories of validator payouts and all sorts of things like that. That's definitely worth checking out.
Cool.
And look
Fantastic.
forward to mainnet launching sometime in the end of September.
End of September. All right. You heard it here first. See you guys next time.
Thank you.
See you. Thanks, Mark.